Hi, I'm Eric, and I get paid to grow YouTube channels. It's a story that you've heard before. 14-year-old kid falls in love with making YouTube videos, grinds, gets better at it, eventually gets hired by his favorite YouTuber. Now my LinkedIn profile looks mwah. I essentially stared at screens for 10 years, and now I get paid to do it. But there is one part of my story that's unique. For the past few years, I've spent about as much time in Google Sheets as I have in Adobe Premiere. And I noticed a pattern. Understanding these patterns completely changed the way that I think about growing YouTube channels. So, in the spirit of the new year, I wanted to tell you guys what took me 10 years to realize in 10 minutes. Here are my 4 laws for views on YouTube. Starting with rule number 1. The internet has a shape. This is the power law. It's the idea that a small portion of efforts are going to yield the vast majority of tangible results. So I realized that this shape was pretty important when I was working on this one YouTube channel with about 400,000 subscribers. Their top video had less than 2 million views and was the vast majority of their performance on that channel. The vast majority of views, subscribers, new viewers, all came from one video. And I thought that was kind of strange until I started at the YouTube channel I'm running now, cataloged all the views, saw the same shape. And so then I decided to go back. I cataloged all the views for the first YouTube channel I ever ran. It was a channel that never broke 7,000 subs, and it was the same shape. It didn't really matter how big or small a channel was. A small portion of videos were doing the vast majority of our growth, our performance, of money.
And then I remembered something. In film school, everyone would say, oh, only a couple of you are ever gonna make it. So I wanted to see if that shape applied in other industries too. I
took a random screenshot of the top performing shows across every streaming service, and one show and one streaming service absolutely ran away with it. I decided to do another screenshot a few weeks later, and even though the distribution was a little less sparse, it still follows that same shape.
And then the big turning point happened when I zoomed out and looked at streaming performance as a whole. YouTube and Netflix are both 8 and 9% of TV viewership, and every other streamer is just trying to pick up the 2s and the 3%. On YouTube alone, this distribution can be seen at pretty much any scale, an individual channel, a niche, or the platform as a whole.
You notice this gap is everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Gaming, podcasting, Joe Rogan is a monster. All-time box office for movies, pick any year. Look up the distribution for box office, and you'll notice this gap. Well, I'll show you an example later. So why is it that this shape is everywhere, and how is it holding your optimization back on your YouTube channel? It's burger time, baby.
If you could have any burger at the exact same price and the exact same time, you'd probably just default to whatever you think is the best.
When everything is the same cost, people are gonna default to a small group of options. They're gonna be overwhelmed, and they're just gonna go for whatever they perceive as the best.
So in order to understand what makes something the best, we have to look at rule number 2. Content only ever has 2 purposes.
All right, so there are 2 basic types of content. The first type is watch time content.
Now, the stereotype for watch time content is like the Subway Surfers with Family Guy clips playing on top of it, but it's really anything that just exists for the sake of entertainment. And you're competing against pretty much everything.
There is essentially an infinite amount of this content, which means that the odds that your content specifically is going to be chosen are slim to none. Watch time content can essentially be anywhere on the power law chart, and sometimes watch time content is so good at harvesting your attention, it can end up close to that top 1%, but there's a bigger, deeper reason why things make it past that bottom 99th percentile and into the real winners club.
The second type of content is what's really exciting. This is what I would call campfire content, and it's essentially any content that exists to connect people. It's cultural glue, like a conversation starter. So the big reason that these top 1%ers are disproportionately this campfire content is just the nature of culture itself. Culture is a feedback loop game. The more people like something, the more they tell other folks about it, and the more it sort of creates this unfair advantage. A lot of people in our space say, oh, YouTube is the future, traditional media is cooked, but traditional media is good at one thing: culture.
Check out the 2023 top grossing movies. Barbie pulls way ahead of the pack. Number 2 is Super Mario Bros. And Oppenheimer is all the way at number 4. Hollywood just figured out how to cater to people on a level where they had to be a part of something bigger than themselves.
But the creator economy still has this same distribution because the internet is still a word of mouth game. Sort of.
YouTube doesn't know a single thing about the contents of this video. It is just pixels. It's just data to it, but it does know how you're behaving with it. In fact, you just told 5 people to watch this video by making it this far, and you are gonna tell a 6th by hitting the subscribe button. So whether you're a culture's business or an indicator's business, more views translates to more value, either because you're a part of a cultural conversation or because in some way you're telling the platform, hey, this is good, this deserves to be served more.
So I've got some bad news for you. Keeping people's attention is pretty important. I've got this ridiculous rig for a reason, but it's not enough. Attention and people who can get your attention, those are pretty abundant now. But relevance, that's scarce. So how do you sit at the center of a culture? Well, the answer is going to be my rule number 3, but before I can tell you that rule, we need to look at one word that this all boils down to.
Exceptionalism. And this is a word I'd hear in film school a lot and absolutely hated, because people would say things like, well, you just have to be so undeniably good that people will always go and respect you and they'll love your work. And I think it's a little more specific than that. There's actually 2 very specific ways that you can be exceptional.
The first flavor of exceptionalism is exceptional timing, which is essentially just finding gaps between supply and demand.
The most obvious example of this is something like TikTok. During the pandemic, lots of people stayed at home. TikTok put tons of money into advertising. New viewers flooded onto the platform, which incentivized new creators to come on because it felt like just about anybody could get views. And then slowly, people stopped using the platform. They figured out who they liked, and that gap kind of closed. And yes, I'm about to compare TikTok to an Oscar-winning film, but it works in traditional too. Get Out was released in 2017, a year after the US changed presidential administrations, and a lot of people were having a reckoning with their relationship with race and racism and, I don't know, some really heady political concepts in the US.
There was this cultural, emotional demand for explorations of race in America, and Get Out could satisfy those in a way that no one else really could. So the tactical way to find these supply-demand gaps is this concept called outlier theory. And this basically just boils down to starting a brand new YouTube account, watching a bunch of videos from the niche that you want to conquer. From there, you find video concepts that did a lot of views on small YouTube channels, and then do your own twist on that title and thumbnail. For example, in this video, I noticed that there's this big trend where MRI brain scans are killing in the education niche. So I'm trying to essentially hop on that trend in the title and thumbnail.
Oh, here are some good gaps where you could potentially do a lot of views really quickly. Internet in the Philippines, Latin America, West Africa is all up. So if you understand these cultures well, if you speak Tagalog or Spanish, then these could be great markets for you to produce content for. PhD students in India are up 60% in the past 5 years. Latino people in the US just like love watching TV. Like Marcelo Hernandez is like totally a gap on SNL. We watch a lot of TV. YouTube viewing on TV is up. This is one that we hear about all the time, but if you can make something that is uniquely equipped for a TV, you could see some serious reward. And conservatives in the US feel remarkably unseen. So if you want to make content that's Christian content, for example, I think that there's a real boom time, a potential renaissance for folks who know how to speak to that culture authentically.
The big issue with using these timing gaps alone is that the internet's really competitive. Between AI getting better and more people coming online competing to take those content gaps before you do, it's just tough building a full business off that. So if timing gaps aren't enough, you need to figure out how to get people to watch you for you. Which takes us to rule number 3, cultural relevance requires taking risks.
The number 1 rule for great execution in any creative venture is to understand that great ideas tend to sound like really shitty ideas. Here's an example. I watch a lot of 1950s samurai films and Japanese cinema in general, but I also really have a lot of nostalgia for a cartoon I watched when I was a child. Wouldn't it be awesome if I made like this massive opera where like that cartoon kind of felt like a samurai movie? Maybe you think that's cool. A lot of people thought it was stupid. Star Wars.
Here's what I kind of realized a few months ago. Say you want to make tech reviews, but instead of just hiring people who come from the tech journalism space, you also bring on a few folks with a background in shooting music videos so that you have this almost kind of cinematic, rhythmic quality to your content. What do you think that is? Even in this video, I knew that I'd be cooked if I tried to compete in the YouTube optimization niche. There's just too many people who've been around for too long in that space. But if I took some genre conventions from what the kids in the YouTube New Wave are doing and applied it to education, maybe I could do something that does well, combining 2 YouTube genres.
A lot of the times these pairings on paper don't make any sense, but when you find that right rhythm, when you find the right collaborators, magical things can happen. So here are some good pairings I was thinking about. I think live stand-up is excellent, but it's really only for entertainment right now. If somebody could figure out how to educate in that medium, I think you could be the top search result on YouTube. True crime, huge. Animation, also huge. Coco Melon plus true crime, yes, you like that. You like that. All right. Strangers on the internet reacting. Jubilee is really good at putting a bunch of hot people in a room and telling them to talk to each other. Imagine if you put a bunch of hot people in a room and then had them work out. You could kill on the fitness niche. So when I talk about YouTube as a game or attention as this market, I could see how it creates some cynicism. Because there are a lot of creative people out there who aren't working on this platform, and sometimes it feels like the people who are the best at the game are the ones who are able to rig it. There's a degree to where in the short term that is true. But more and more I've noticed that the folks who stick around and who capture culture in the way I'm talking about, where their entire channel is somehow an outlier, they follow rule number 4 so strictly, which is, yes, understand the game, but do everything in your power to preserve your sense of wonder. I'm Eric. Life has been good to me. I'll see you in a few months.